Welcome to HEC-TV's live interactive program that's part of St. Louis.
The whole production is pulled together.
It's going to be a steel bridge.
The way the cockpit is designed.
The highest rated green building in the world.
Welcome to HEC-TV Live.
Hi everybody and welcome to HEC-TV Live. I'm Tim Gore, your host for today's program, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our Inside the Artist Studio series, this afternoon's focus, Medals. We're here in the Medal Studio at Craft Alliance, a fabulous organization located in the Grand Center Entertainment District of St. Louis. They also have an organization, a location in the Del Mar Loop area of the University City. You can find out more about them, of course, at their website, craftalliance.org. We'll talk a little bit about them. But our main focus today is going to be talking about creating things out of metal. And to do that, we're being joined by artist Robert Longyear. Robert, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, good to be here. Good to be here.
As always, we're going to be interested in everybody's questions throughout the program. We'll be joined by interactive schools who are connecting with us from various parts of the country today. We'll be going up to British Columbia, we'll be going down to Texas, and we'll also be going a little bit east to Tennessee for 3 student groups who are joining us via interactive video conference. If you're watching on the web or on television, then you can email us your questions to live@hectv.org. That email address again is live@hectv.org, and we look forward to getting your questions throughout the program. I'm going to come to our interactive groups in just a few minutes for you guys to think about some introductory questions you might have about Robert and the kind of work he does and why he does that. I'll call on each of you and you can unmute your microphones when you get called, and then please remember to mute your microphones again so when we come back here we can actually make sure we see Robert. Don't forget the email address is live@hectv.org. Robert, let's give the students a little bit of a background about you. Where do you come from? Growing up in Kansas, if I remember right, and were you always interested in art?
Yeah, you've got a good memory. Yeah, I did grow up in Kansas, and I grew up sort of a rural farm sort of kid. So at a very young age, I could go anywhere I sort of wanted with a pellet gun and climb barbed wire fences and ride horses and things. And so kind of living in Kansas, it's quiet, and the art thing I think kind of came along much later.
So it wasn't like something you necessarily pursued as a high school student, or was it?
Not necessarily. Like I was kind of pretty involved in athletics and soccer and I guess marching band and symphonic band and getting all jazzy and things with a trombone. But yeah, it really wasn't until kind of my undergraduate kind of college experience that I kind of fell into art and jewelry and metalsmithing in particular. So I just sort of ended up in an elective kind of class and started taking metals and really was engaged by the tools and the material and just sort of the bright minds that were about the studio. And they said, hey, you're kind of good at this. Maybe you think about becoming a part of the program. And I just remember kind of thinking I was crazy, and I was, you got to be kidding me. You can major in this. And so, fast forward to now.
And you did indeed, mate.
You certainly can, yes.
We've got some images we can bring up for the students and everybody who's watching us of work that you've done recently. And as they begin to look at these pictures, can you talk a little bit about what makes metal an interesting medium for you? What do you like about working with metal?
It's interesting to me. Like, I've always been a person with pretty busy hands. The metal is just it's been a neat thing. Like you kind of have all this acid and the fire and the hammers and the physicality of it's pretty neat. But at the same time, I've always enjoyed the sort of minutia and kind of
the intricate,
the intricacies of jewelry and small scale work. And
so the vast majority of your work is pretty small scale.
Well,
yeah. Now, as soon as
complicated
you say that, you're going to
question,
complicate
but,
the process.
I guess the big idea is, back to that Kansas thing and kind of roaming the sort of prairie fields and things. I've always been very interested in kind of the landscapes we live and work and play and learn in. So, just that idea of kind of tourism and kind of going to places, looking at things, eventually entered into kind of what I do in the studio. And it's been a neat thing to kind of be cognizant of myself as an artist, out in the world, looking, observing, interacting, and becoming another sort of layer on top of the dynamics at play. Kind of here recently in St. Louis, I've been really engaged in our neighborhood. So you have that idea of our body as sort of our more intimate sort of landscape, and the jewelry relating to the landscape that we kind of live in.
So in essence, like I could be wearing a piece inspired by the landscape I live in.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I want to give our students a chance to begin to think about asking you questions, but before we do that, let's define for them what are you sitting in front of, and what's the kind of thing you're going to create during our hour today?
Well, we're sitting at this terrific sort of desk, you know, and in front of me is kind of a lot of the tools and materials that we'll use throughout the program, but it's also things that I employ kind of when I'm working on the jewelry. And the neat thing about this is, you know, it's the same equipment that we're looking at here is used by kind of makers around the world. It kind of skirts sort of time and culture, and so there's a common sort of vocabulary kind of in all that.
And what is it, where do you want to begin today? What will we be starting with? What are the types of metals you're going to use?
Well, if you swoop over everything here, you'll see kind of parts and pieces and things that I've gotten just a bit of a Julia Child sort of jump on. So there's all these little kind of elements that are laid out here on the soldering brick, and this is all sterling silver wire, and they'll all kind of in front of our eyes and in front of my hands come together into some little sort of special thing that kind of relates to the work that you students have looked at on the website. There's kind of funny little references, if you think about it, that I've boiled down that maybe will eventually look like combine pieces or flags or television antennas, and kind of this corrugated silver sort of idea is kind of reminiscent of at the same time old tin barns that I'd climb along on, but there's oftentimes in my work more of a sort of social comment, so that it'll relate at the same time to kind of favelas and kind of this larger, bigger idea too.
Well, what will you be starting to do? What will be the first step that we're going to see?
Well, I was just going to begin by soldering.
Okay.
So as you guys can see, there's all these little pieces, and how do they come together into kind of a conglomerate? That's through a term called fabrication. So it's by using the high heat of the torch and the little pieces of little nibs of silver solder here, which comes from this wire, and I'm just going to kind of get busy on that and stick it all together.
Why don't you get started on that and start the process, and while Robert begins the process of soldering some of these small pieces that you see here that will become part of the bigger piece that he's going to be finishing by the time we get done with our period of 60 minutes today, I want to go to each of our interactive groups and see if you've got any just beginning questions for Robert about what it's like to work with metal, or why he chose to get involved with metal, or the process of soldering, the things you see happening. And then as we continue to watch the piece come together, your questions can focus on all sorts of other areas. Let's go down to Cornersville, Tennessee. Cornersville, come right on in. Do you have a question right now?
Just maybe, why did he decide to become an artist? He kind of answered that at the very first, but he just kind of fell into it.
Yeah, she's asking in terms of like why you chose to become an artist. You kind of fell into it, you kind of described that college experience, but what was it about that experience in that class or whatever, and what you continue to do with your work that makes art something that you find fascinating and challenging?
Well, I think for me it's kind of it matches sort of a intellectual curiosity and the things we look at and learn, and mixed with this kind of sort of love for the media and process, and then the way that it's a big, broad sort of conversation. It's just like I guess the same feeling you get from poetry or for sitting at the symphony. It has this ability to kind of distill a life into kind of a format that is highly sort of you.
When and as you solder now, what's the temperature you're dealing with that flame?
Right, we get pretty hot. We're about 1,400 degrees.
Okay.
To flow this solder. And it's, you know, this torch is rather small, so I can really...
You can do some really fine work.
Kind of pinpoint everything, yeah.
So you have torches that would be of various sizes, depending upon the kind of connections you were making, the size and scale of the piece?
Yeah, correct. It's all in kind of relation to the size and the scale of the work. So bigger work, bigger torch, in some cases different equipment.
Okay. Let's go down to Kelton High School in Wheeler, Texas. Kelton, do you all have a question right now for Mr. Longyear? Go right ahead.
No, thanks.
Okay, we'll be coming back to you throughout the program as well, and don't forget, to those of you who are watching us via the web or television, you can email us your questions to live@hectv.org. Now, I notice in the medals that we've got going here, the color is, were all of these pieces that look, I'll call them like little spidery-like things, or maybe they're more like flowery-like things.
Okay.
Thanks for accepting whatever little description I choose to give. Were they all the same metal to begin with? Like, did they all start out as, were they all silver pieces? Or aluminum or whatever?
Yeah, this was all silver, and it was kind of more specifically wire. So, you know, I can call up a supplier, and silver's silver, but, you know, they've kind of formatted this stuff to be wire or sheet or stock or casting grain, and that's kind of the neat thing, in that the same material, and it provides you with all these.
And the little round objects that look like, you know, links on a chain, did they come that way to start with, or have you formed them into that rounded shape?
Right, it was straight wire.
Okay.
And, you know, a little something with the fingers or the pliers, and you just kind of... Whoop.
Okay. Now, I noticed the ones that I'm going to call, like, look kind of like flags, the other two that are up there.
Yeah.
One appears to be like gold or coppery. Is that... Am I right about that, that's a different metal, or is that silver too?
Well, this has not been really hit by the heat. So the silver, you know, as it comes, we're kind of familiar with seeing it like this. But just through, you know, the use of the torch and everything that's going on, it'll, of course this won't do it on camera. But, you know, it creates oxides on the surface of the metal. So, you know, this has been soldered already, and, you know, the oxides have formed. And that's kind of a big part about soldering it, is your metal has to be clean and stay clean in order for the solder to flow.
So the goal is to get these individual pieces soldered the way you want them to look, and then these pieces are going to be put together into what will become the finished object?
Yes.
And is this going to be wearable?
Well, you know,
like, are you going to make it with the idea that it would have some sort of like, you know, something that could attach that I could wear it, or is it more like decorative to put on the wall, or?
Well, it could fulfill a couple different functions, but yes, wearable. It's also been said that sometimes you don't so much wear my work, you carry it. So. Right. Right.
McBride, I'm going to go back up to you guys in Canada. A question for Mr. Longyear?
We have a couple. How long does it typically take for the solder to cool? And does the cooling time differ with different metals?
So how long does it take to cool? And does the cooling time differ for different metals?
Well, not at all, really. Like, if you were to listen real close or later, I just go...
And they're done.
And it's done.
And this is just water. You're dipping them in right here?
Yeah, that's just water. Nothing too special.
Nothing fancy schmancy, like change the color of them or whatever.
Right.
And once you've dipped them in the water, they're then good to go.
Yeah, and then
And what are you putting? Is it just water? You're putting them in over here in the Little Dipper crock pot?
Right.
Giving them a shout out to the rival crock pot people.
It's a little different. You know, bearing in mind that idea of the oxides and the metal needing to be clean in order to kind of solder and further down the line fabricate. Yeah, I have to clean those oxides off.
Okay.
So those went in dirty. This is basically a swimming pool sort of acid. So a couple minutes in here, and this was all oxidized and black.
Oh.
I throw it in the pickle and it comes out.
It comes out white.
Comes out great. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, British Columbia, for that question. We'll be coming back to you guys again. Cornersville, Tennessee, a question from you.
How much do the products cost when you're finished with them?
By the time you're finished, kids are always interested in making money, obviously. By the time you're finished with a piece, one, how much might such a piece cost? And then just in a general, how do you determine cost for any piece you might want to sell?
Okay, well, I guess the world spins and it all comes down to that bank. And, a lot of allowance, really. But, yeah, my gallery in New York, they kind of, like a completed brooch sells for $800.
Okay.
Yeah. So as far as determining all that, that's a rather finicky sort of formula, and you know there's people in the world that have formulas and they multiply and add and subtract. And then there's maybe people that say, well, the light bill's due in 3 days, and how much is that? So
Right.
you're somewhere in between all that.
Okay. What's happening next now and what you're going to do?
Well, I kind of made this stuff, and I guess maybe to demystify this, it started as just silver sheet. So if you kind of look at this right here, it's just a sheet. And then there's, things in the world that we sort of use in the studio, and this is called a tube ringer. So, and it's the way to kind of get that corrugation.
That corrugated steel look?
All right, so
you're going to demonstrate to us now how that actually happens and goes through?
I am. Let me get this started here.
Okay.
Maybe my mom would cringe.
That's right.
$3,000 for those teeth, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of,
It's crimping it as it goes through, and you've already got some of them cut down to the size and scale you're going to use in this particular piece?
Well, just enough to have the trajectory, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So
take it away. What happens next?
Well, I'm just going to kind of sit here and fiddle a bit and chop some of these things up.
Okay.
Here we go.
And as you continue to do that and fiddle a bit, as you say, and chop some things up, let's go back to Texas again. Kelton, a question from you?
Yes, we have two.
Go for it.
All right. When you're making jewelry, which kind of metal do you think is best for it?
When you're making jewelry, which kind of metal do you think is best for it? Do you have a preference on what you like to work with?
Well, I like to, if I'm working with metal, I quite prefer silver. It's just a nice material. And I say nice, and you're all like, well, what's that mean?
Thank you. That was my follow-up question,
right.
Robert.
It's just sort of in relation to kind of your copper and your brass. It's a cleaner material to work with. It's a little more pleasing. It's kind of in that middle realm of precious and non-precious. And, I guess there's economy that goes along with that as well. I'm not so much working with gold. And there's this funny sort of thing in jewelry that's developed over time, beginning in kind of the 60s, where, you kind of shift from the value being given to the preciousness of the material to this kind of audacious sort of value on
what it is you've created,
the idea of the artist, and kind of their place in the world.
So the work of the artist became a bit more paramount to like the cost of the piece than what the metal was that went into it.
Right, in some cases.
Okay.
But you go to Tiffany and it's a different sort of thing, and it's a name. You go to Kmart and it's a different sort of thing, and it's it's a name. So jewelry is quite a loaded sort of subject. It means a lot to people for pretty many reasons.
And Kelton, you guys had a second question, and Kelton, I would mention, if you can shift your camera to where we can more accurately see the students who are asking the questions. Right now we're mostly seeing a corner of your room, but Kelton, I think you guys had a second question?
Okay, yes, I'll get him to stand. Brody. Come over here and stand.
Say that you were going to make a road sign and, coming into town or something. And how thick do you think the metal should be?
So as you think in terms of whether it's creating a road sign or different pieces, the thickness of metals, the thinness of metals, and how does that affect the kind of work you can do with them?
Right. Well, in jewelry, a lot of your consideration is the weight. So, I've kind of rolled this down. The thickness can be also called gauge. So there's different gauges of metal. So this is kind of 26 gauge, which is pretty thin.
Okay.
You jump up to something like 6 gauge and it's thick.
Okay. So the smaller the number, the thicker the gauge.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Now the piece that you're creating here, did you draw something out to start with, or is this all just coming from some thought in your mind, or what's your prep work before you get to the fact that I see something being built here, so to speak?
Well, once again, it goes to that kind of engagement in the world and looking at things, and you get out, you look at things, you commit them to memory, but at the same time, you're kind of working in the studio, and much like you guys all sort of build vocabulary and sort of your words and the ways you write there kind of scholastically, and formulas you learn in math class, like you bring that along with you. So, you know, at some point this sort of visual vocabulary and the way these pieces sort of manifest and the vocabulary of processes just kind of sort of build up. So, you know, sometimes I'll snap pictures out in the world, maybe I draw a little bit, but kind of at my best, I just sort of get a lot of stuff in front of me, little pieces, and I start to build like that.
Okay.
So I always know just enough.
Just enough?
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the students see in the work that you're actually going to be creating here. So I noticed you've got three sides, so to speak, made, and you've already soldered some little, like, silvery, clippy, looking like great artistic term, but a silvery, clippy thing?
Right, these are just T-pins, little silver, clippery T-pins, and I can, into this soft break, I can kind of shove them down in there. So what I'm doing is sort of bracing these pieces with the sort of aid of the fire brick and the
So
T-pins.
these pieces, these pins will not be part of the work. They're just there helping you brace the work as you put it together.
Right, it's kind of the architecture to kind of solder with. So.
Okay, I'll let you keep doing it.
Yeah.
Robert will continue. Back to British Columbia. You guys have a question? Take it away.
Yeah, I have a question. Would you say the metal you work with is pretty thin and durable?
Is the metal that you work with pretty durable, pretty strong?
Yeah, for the most part. You know, you drop it on the ground and it gets run over it, you got...
You have a slight degree of difficulty?
You know, but, you know, anything else, it's kind of... You can throw my work around a little bit. And in some cases it gets better.
And do you like working with metal, I'll say, in its natural color more, or do you like the idea of, like, you know, switching its color out, like by temperature or baths of some sort, creating all sorts of different colorations?
Right, well, you know, I do have an interest in color, and that's been an ongoing sort of conversation in my work and figuring out how to do that in neat ways. And there's, you know, a lot of stuff at the disposal of an artist, such as, you know, everything from paints to enamel to kind of resins to powder coating, so to the chemical patinas, which are kind of the tanks and things where it's sort of an immersion. I think you guys have all maybe been out in the world and you see sort of a sculpture that's turned sort of that beautiful sort of green and blue. But then at the same time, you know, you've seen kind of bike frames and things of anodized aluminum that are just kind of real hot and candy coated. Okay. So now I'm assuming we're going to end up with something that's four-sided here? Yeah, we're going for a little hut sort of idea. Maybe,
okay.
You know.
And so so these four pieces will come together and then you will solder these four pieces together, or will they be hooked together in a different way?
Right, I'm going to solder everything together here.
Okay.
And then these other little things that I made will kind of plow in. And
plow in and add on?
We'll throw some of this in and...
What I'm going to call the pitchfork.
Right, the pitchfork.
For some reason that gives me, I guess you could also look at it as a horse's stirrup.
I like that.
But I kind of like the pitchfork, a little Gothic, American Gothic moment of holding the pitchfork up.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Tennessee. A question from Cornersville. Take it away.
I have a couple of questions. One of the students wants to know, do you ever work larger than, say, in a jewelry manner? Do you work with big pieces of metal?
Do you work with, like, do you ever think in terms of working on a larger scale with bigger pieces of metal, thicker pieces of metal, etc., or is most of your work on a small jewelry-oriented scale?
Well, it's sort of like the idea of the same work and different work building out of that. So, you know, I also work in certain situations in what's called installation, where you're kind of dealing with a very large space and you're talking about the kind of ideas in your work as a large space, and as people you know, are able to kind of experience that and walk through it. So, you know, I'll have small jewelry, and then I'll have a big gallery kind of full of objects, and you know, so there's this kind of fun sort of scale shift that's involved there. So as far as like working with big things, yeah, big spaces, but not necessarily big pieces of metal.
Now, are the scissors you're using like regular scissors I would just buy to cut paper, or am I dealing with a metal cutting scissor here?
Well, my the material is thin enough that yeah, these are just Fisker's Office Basics.
Okay.
You know, you don't want to go grabbing Mom's Good scissors for something like this.
Kelton High School in Texas. A question for Mr. Longyear.
What is the hardest metal that you have yet worked with?
In terms of difficulty, what do you find the hardest metal to work with?
Well, they were all hard in the beginning. You know, it's like anything else, and I remember sort of sitting down and trying to make a cut with a saw the first day ever, and it was amazingly hard.
Do certain metals give themselves over to certain types of work with them that other metals would not? Like, for example, or does it all just depend on the thickness? Like, could I do the crinkling thing with copper as effectively as you just did here with the silver? Or, you know, does the metal itself, do certain metals, because of the nature of their properties, lend themselves to certain kinds of things you can do with them?
Well, this is all working kind of great because of the material and the studio and the tools I have available to me here. Like, you know, I could take a piece of steel that's this thick and as big as this room and probably corrugate it. If I had kind of this factory and the furnaces and the cranes to lift it and the 20 guys to kind of operate everything. You know,
so when I think like a Frank Serra piece, big scale metallic, he's dealing with much, you know, large scale equipment.
Yeah, very different situation. But you know, it's
Richard Serra. I think I said Frank.
Right, Richard Serra, and it all comes down to kind of you know, his work as an artist in space, and once again, you know, how we all sort of participate.
Right.
So.
Okay. Are you about to solder again?
Oh, sure.
Whatever. You tell me where you're taking us next.
Well, yeah.
You have the vision in your head, and I'm following along, Robert.
Right. Next, I'm going to kind of come in and start to put these guys together.
All right. So the sides of the barn door, the sides of the barn, or the hut, so to speak,
right,
are going to start coming together.
I guess it's a certain sort of barn raising. Yeah.
Yeah, so to speak. Yeah, a little barn raising action happening right here, right now. And you just develop over time. I mean, it's kind of like second nature to you now, I suppose, at this time, where like somebody's able to shoot a basketball really well. They know what they have to do to be able to get the basketball into the goal from 20 feet away or whatever.
Exactly.
The same thing is true for you. You now have a sense of just how you want to use that flame.
Absolutely. So there's a sweet spot to everything, right? So I'm shooting for the sweet spot.
Okay. And we'll begin to notice that the work you're doing to create, I'll call it the burned side, so to speak, what I'm seeing become a little darker, the black, etc. that we're seeing.
Yeah, these are our oxides and things right here.
Right,
so
the metal is oxidizing.
And you'll see me dip in on this stuff right here. This is called flux, and that basically is a kind of formulated sort of substance that in a lot of cases keeps the oxides from forming, and keep your work nice and clean.
So the flux actually helps you keep it clean, more like the original color of the metal?
Exactly.
Okay. Back to British Columbia, another question from you folks in McBride.
Besides your studio in New York, how do you make your products?
You mentioned the fact that there's a location in New York. You have a website as well. If they were interested in knowing, like, where could they find your work and or potentially, you know, see what else you'd have for sale?
Well, that's a good question. You know, as an artist, you kind of do a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different kinds of artists. There's different calibers of artists. There's different sorts of, I guess maybe you call them theaters for artists. But kind of a lot of what I do is kind of exhibition driven. So it will be thematic exhibitions across the country where there is this sort of discourse or idea behind the work, and oftentimes you're invited to those, so it'll be a group show, which can be any more than one artist, right? So you've got this nice sort of group going on. In other cases, you'll have a solo exhibition, but you know, in reference to the New York thing, that's a man named Sharon Cranston, and he has a gallery called Sharon Cranston Arts. And you know, he mainly brings European artists to the States and represents their work here kind of exclusively. And he's from Holland. Has a really kind of neat aesthetic in the collection that he carries, and yeah, I'm pretty humbled to be sort of carried by him and represented. So yeah, you can go to his website and see these things, and punch up a lot of other jewelry artists that will kind of, you know, I would imagine you students, you think jewelry and you jump to something, but there's all these different things that artists employ. So I not only so much use, you know, metal, kind of in a past recent series of work, it'll be metal and insulation, and I made all these punch outs from kind of romance novel pages and wax, and so you know, there's also these kind of conductive materials that I'll use in my work, and by conductive I just mean they kind of carry an idea or they carry a history along with them.
Not conductive in a metallic sense, like conducting energy.
So I can really employ that in my work.
The little lid we've got here with objects in it, this is not regular water?
Right.
This is like, are they sitting in flux or like flux in water?
That's flux that I've sort of watered down.
And the goal is because you're putting them in this, they're more likely to keep they're going to keep their original color to a larger extent?
Well, yeah, it keeps it clean.
Okay.
Which is related to that color.
Okay. And I notice as we look here at the piece, and I don't know what we'll be able to zone in on, in some instances it's like black, like you've charted, and in some instances it's kind of a green tint, and in some instances it looks more like blood red. Is that all just a result of like how long you've kept the flame against that particular piece, or is that based on like it had more or less flux there, or a combination thereof?
Yeah, more or less flux. It's heat. It's a lot of things.
Okay, I like the color. Yeah, it is. I like the color variation. The gradations are cool.
Yeah, and everybody kind of gets seduced by that, and but you know, at the end of the day, you toss it in that pickle and it all goes away. So back to that kind of coloration on the surface. And what are you going to do, artists? What are you gonna do?
Cornersville, let's go to you guys in Tennessee. Another question?
Yes, we do have a question.
Which artist inspires you the most?
In terms of artists who have inspired you, what kind of work have you noticed and taken inspiration from?
Well, I guess in this idea of craft, you know, there's craft artists throughout time that you know, I've gotten to sort of interact with, and you know, you kind of get to sit with people, and it's an enriching sort of thing because you're all of a sudden kind of introduced to their personality, who they are, the way they work. You're also introduced to the kind of these techniques and different materials that they use, and that's really quite lush. And I count myself very kind of lucky to kind of be, you know, a part of all that and share in all that, and you know, in a certain sense, be holding a position in that sort of lineage.
Okay.
But you know, then there's kind of other artists that I've really looked to and have been inspired by, and just sort of love their work. So, you know, I've always been into really. This is a good question.
So now I see you've turned it over. Is the piece that's now the base, so to speak, that flat piece I'm seeing going across? Are you intending it to eventually be the base, or will that become a top part of the piece?
Yeah, this will be kind of a roofy sort of element.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got people watching over the web and over television, and Helen sent me a question wanting to know if you've used gems in your work. Do you like the idea of using stones and combining them with metal?
I'll definitely use like stone setting techniques. But it'll be kind of you know, I talked about using other materials in my work, so it'll be setting a piece of broken plate glass or a piece of, you know, like brick that I've maybe even carved up to mimic the idea of a faceted stone. So, you know, yes, I've set a diamond before in my life, and that was kind of harrowing and whatever. But you know, it on some level, I've always kind of been more into the idea of the creation of a jewel rather than the use of a jewel from its onset.
Just so you know, we're about 35 to 38 minutes into the program, just to give you a time reference for what it is you're trying to create and as we go through.
All right.
Let's go to Kelton High School again down in Texas. Kelton, a question or two from you guys?
Yes, what are you making?
Ah, there you go. They haven't. How would you describe what are you making? That was the question. What are you making? How would you respond to that, Robert?
Well, piece of jewelry. Did you guys have a chance to kind of look at the fine HEC-TV website and kind of get a notion for the type of work that I make?
I was just asking about this one he's making here.
Right, about this one you're making here. It's going to be similar to what they've seen as those other pieces. Mm-hmm. And this has a real three-dimensionality to it, as opposed to a lot of times I think of jewelry as pretty flat.
Right.
You know, it's just going to sit against my, it's the brooch that's going to sit on my sweater or whatever. It's a pretty flat piece. Even earrings, just dangle, and when you look at them, they're flat. Here, I'm getting a real sense of three-dimensionality. And are you interested in three-dimensionality as a work as a kind of a concept overall, that you like things to have, not to appear so flat?
Definitely. I guess I'm a builder at heart. Just I like to build these things three-dimensionally.
Okay.
So, I like the idea that you students are questioning. Like what
is this going to be?
But you get interested and you get curious, and there's a couple places on the internet that maybe you kind of tool around with. With your teachers there. So the Sharon Cranston website is great, and his name's spelled Charon, and then Cranston is Kransen. And every artist, it has like their bio, it has images of their work, it'll have their kind of resume, so you can kind of see what sort of activity they do. Mm-hmm. Another great one is Klimt, KLIMT 02, and that's a .net address, and that's kind of artists from around the world. And once again, it'll show images of their work. You can read artist statements. So take the time to maybe get inquisitive and look at all this and find that I'm not just kind of full of whatever in doing all this.
We have about 19 minutes left, Robert, as you think about where you're going.
All right.
British Columbia, a question from you?
We're not sure if you already answered the question or not, Robert, but what metal do you prefer to work with most?
Do you have a preference for the metal you prefer to work with the most?
Silver.
And we've talked a little bit about silver before, but is it the color, is it the properties of silver, is it all of the above, is it the fact you can do so many different things with it? What makes silver, a lot of people would think, oh, gold's coolest. Why silver for you?
Well, it's all those things. I guess, gold's like $1,300 an ounce.
Okay, so financial considerations make a difference.
So that's a big thing.
Uh-huh.
Silver, it's approaching like $30 an ounce. So, it's an easier sort of material to step to financially. And then it's...
Sizzle.
It gets down to, well, this is what I know.
Okay.
And it's kind of where my education's sat. And, so there's a lot of... there's a lot of that involved.
Now, as you students look at this, Robert mentioned the idea before of like kind of a hut-inspired thing. As you guys look at it now and you see the top and the front, what I'm going to call the front of the piece. Robert may be saying, no, it's not the front or whatever. But you can get a real sense of that idea of a hut or some sort of structure. It reminds me very much about like an outbuilding on a farm that you might see somewhere.
There you go. Yeah.
Cornersville, Tennessee, a question from you.
Do you have any suggestions for any of us who would like to pursue art as a career?
So when they think about and that's a great question, Cornersville, thank you very much. When they think about pursuing art potentially as a career, you talked about the work you did in college, etc. What are the kinds of things that they should think about in terms of pursuing their inspiration? How long did it take you? What kind of study did you go through? And as they think about that, whether it's going to be a major in college or doing it, as a passion on the side, what are the kinds of considerations that they should consider, and what would be some examples from your past they could think about?
Well, people come to this in all different ways, and that's really kind of the joy about it. Like I know personalities out in the world making work that are extremely sort of successful and support their families, and sell work, and they've never been to art school. You know, and then there's people that have been through kind of, you know, very prestigious programs that push coffee at Starbucks. So, you know, where are you at in the middle of all that? You know, I've always thought, you know, education's such a big sort of thing, and it's a terrifically special time in your life. And you try these things, and you keep it wide and varied, and you sort of, you know, see what interests you. You figure out how you learn.
So being open to experiences,
you know,
and looking at things in different ways because of what you're experiencing.
You're keeping all this like wide and varied, and eventually you find something that's really like kind of wow, and you can really wrap yourself around that, and then it's, I don't know, my understanding in life, you know, at that point you're educated and you're not trained, so to speak, and you can kind of apply that however you so choose. Like it's a big world out there, right?
Now, you're about to attach another, you know, what I've referred to as the flowery thing here. And students, I want you to start thinking about how you might see all of this coming together. Because I'm going to assume, Robert, am I accurate in assuming that all these pieces are somehow going to be attached? I'm going to get the hut attached to what you're working on right now?
Right.
Okay, so just try to visualize for yourselves a bit, students, how you might put these pieces together that you're seeing right now. He's got the elements of these flowers. He's got the elements of what I referred to before as the pitchfork-like thing. And he's got the hut, what you might want to do to put those things together. And as you look at that piece now, again, think about the farming, the growing up on the farm, the growing up in Kansas. What are you seeing potentially there as he works with this? We've got about 15 minutes left.
Cool.
And think about how you guys might attach all these things together, and then we'll see what, obviously, Robert ends up with.
Do you make enough to support yourself with your art, or do you do something else to subsidize things in between when you get inspired and actually have sales?
So in terms of supporting yourself, what's the combination between the artwork and the other things you do? And this might give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the outreach work and the work you do here at Craft Alliance.
Right. Well, you know, I graduate from art school. I decided to move to St. Louis, and right away you're kind of thrust into the world, and you know, your parents say, "Ooh, art student, you're gonna starve." Touche. But you know, I kind of walked in Craft Alliance and got myself a job.
And how long ago was that?
Whoa, almost 10 years. At this point,
and so you began by like what? Teaching here, like teaching classes?
Well, it was neat because I had a studio to work in all of a sudden.
Okay.
I was teaching. The retail gallery shop was selling my work.
Okay.
And that's sort of this kind of trinity that maybe some people look for. And you know, I became real interested in the teaching. It was kind of great to not only, you know, be able to do the things that I can do here, but to be able to impart all that to students, which I think is real important, especially in the idea of craft, and once again that idea of lineage. Oh, did you see that? I melted that.
I see that. You melted that. And Craft Alliance, of course, does classes not just in metalsmithing. There's woodworking classes, there's fiber classes, there's pottery classes, working on all sorts of different media, right?
Right. And so all that's kind of going along, and you know, I also I put my hat in the ring for the community outreach job, so I get to go out into the world with this idea of studio work and with the kind of reality of the studios, and apply that in very different sort of ways. So we do residencies in schools, which I run. We bring a lot of schools to our centers to kind of experience our you know, exhibitions and do kind of hands-on work in our studios. And so, you know, somewhere along the way, it was kind of like, well, that really fed my interest. It really kind of plugged into this bigger idea of kind of the arts, not just on a pedestal, you know, in an exhibition, but
something that really is part of people's lives on a daily basis?
Out on the street.
Now, I see you twisting this here.
Yeah, I'm just fiddling, really.
You're fiddling a little bit like, okay.
Yeah.
Because But you like the idea that in this instance it's not going to be just, oh, straight line.
Right.
Well, now we begin to see how he's potentially going to put the hut on top of this other piece that we've got. I'll call it the bicycle-like part, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's with it, which may or may not have been how you guys out in the audience were envisioning it coming together. Cornersville, Tennessee, do you have another question for Mr. Longyear?
How long does it usually take to make your average?
In terms of length of time, obviously this piece is being created in the course of our 60 minutes together. How long does it usually take for you to create pieces in a general sense?
Well, good question. Great question. People always get real sort of interested in that. So, you know, oftentimes when I work, I'll work in a suite of 5 or 6 sort of pieces, and you know, that'll be over a period of a couple weeks usually. So, little fits and starts, time in the studio. But I'm also one that, you know, I do a lot of different sort of work in different places. So, you know, this idea of, hey, we did this in an hour, that's pretty good.
Okay.
So I guess if you were to kind of multiply this out and add a little more water to it, maybe one brooch is somewhere around, you know, 5-6 hours or something.
Okay. 10 minutes left.
Sure.
Just Robert, so you know that in terms of that. And again, thank you for all of you who are watching on television and the web and emailing us questions. And we just got one about, would you describe your work in any way that would like identify like a signature to your work? Like, you know, people can think, oh, they look at a certain mobile-like sculpture, they might think Calder. People might look and say, oh, that's Picasso in his blue period or whatever. Would you say there's something to your work that people would say, oh, it's a Longyear?
Well, I don't know. There's this kind of bigger thing that you chase in the work, and I like to think, you know, you have a lot of sort of teammates out in the world, and in your field. So, you know, there's this idea of just kind of being a individual and sort of sincere voice in your work, but it kind of feeds into this bigger construct of all the work that's being made.
Okay.
And that sounds like a really crazy sort of answer. So, you know, the style's the sort of style, and however many points that gets as far as style points go, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Texas again. Kelton, do you guys have a question?
Yes, your artwork is very interesting. I'd like to know what inspires you to do your artwork.
So they're talking, one, a compliment to you, they find the artwork very interesting.
Oh, thank you.
And in terms of inspiration, again, talk a little bit about that, about what inspires you to do the kind of work you do. Like if you were to make an artist statement, so to speak, that goes along with an exhibition, or if this piece was going to be something that we would be asking about, what would you say to folks?
Well, you know, sometimes they say it's not where you're from, it's where you're at. And where I'm at is kind of St. Louis, and there's this kind of, right away, you know, you're exposed to an urban environment and everything that kind of urban brings along with it. So, and in St. Louis is such that, you know, there's a lot of kind of pretty beat places in the city.
So like in terms of like things that would be like industrial warehouse districts, or things that are like beat up old buildings, or?
Yeah, for a long time my kind of concerns were in this idea of you know, spaces that were no longer used for their original intent. You know, and kind of we're at a place in time in our culture where maybe everything's where something else used to be. So, you know, I got real interested in that.
Well, I know you did that. You did that exhibition or pieces that were inspired by, you know, work like junk you had found along the River de Pere.
Right,
which is a part of the sewer system in St. Louis. For those of you who are not from the area.
Yeah, you guys would have loved that. Oh, he's making work out of a sewer. But it was about kind of being in this kind of underbelly that allows sort of our city to work and run, and you come up against kind of materials that, once again, are conductive of that incite that sort of conversation. And in a sense, you know, it's not so much, oh, okay, he's recycling, he's doing this, whatever, in his work. I always looked at it as kind of giving a different context to the materials and sort of, how you say, maybe redeploying them.
Okay. Should I ask, are we finished or close to or what?
Well, yeah, I guess, hey, how does this become jewelry?
Yeah.
Craft Alliance has a benefit coming up here in a couple weeks, and you know, along with that is artists are kind of asked to participate and kind of give work to the idea of raising money. And what we all do in the metal studio, all of our faculty members, we each make a kind of charm that fits onto a larger sort of kind of necklace piece. And it's, you know, each piece is the individual artist, but it really kind of speaks to the community of educators and makers that sort of
and is this going to be part of that
hub through our studio. So yeah, I thought this would be a fine opportunity to kind of do a little something for the world and work with HEC-TV and around.
And so now it's become a bit more, as a result of putting it into that bath over there, it begins to look a bit more coppery overall.
Right. Well, there's some things in play here. And there's always that behind the scenes.
Yeah. So what's made that happen?
Well,
5 minutes, by the way.
Yeah, this happens to be steel right here.
Okay.
And that contains iron. So in my pickle, you know, it's that acid. It's hot, but there's copper in the solution because the oxides that come out of this metal that form it's actually like a cupric sort of oxide. So there's all this copper in there. And in the steel, with the introduction of that iron, creates a very slight electrical charge.
Okay.
And what's happened on my silver, you can see how all that copper has kind of jumped onto the silver and it's plated. So, you know, in some cases an artist could say, hey, that's really great. In other cases they could shriek.
And say, that's not what I wanted at all.
Cuss and do all these things.
But I mean, that's part of the process, right? I mean, obviously you've done work that you've looked at the end and went, oh, this is not what I was thinking it would be.
Yeah, that happens. That does certainly happen. But, you know, what I'll do from here is I'll go in and I'll throw it in a sandblasting cabinet and just kind of shoot all that copper up, clean it off real nice, and then the sort of coloring that I do the surface gets introduced.
Okay.
So that's about as far as I'm able to kind of get it here while the getting's good.
That's wonderful. We've got about 4 minutes left. I want to go to British Columbia. Final question from you up north.
The students are inquiring as to how much you would expect to make off of a piece such as that.
Assuming you were going to sell a piece like this, what would you think about?
Well, I'll put it in the context of that necklace that's going to the benefit. And the neat thing about all that is it goes to kind of, you know, prop up our programming that we do at Craft Alliance. And I think in the previous years, these kind of faculty-made kind of works fetch around kind of $3 grand or something like that.
Because obviously they're original pieces.
Right.
Okay. And I want to go back to Texas again. Kelton, do you guys have a final question you'd like to ask?
Yes. Do you consider this more as a hobby or as a job that you have to do?
Did you hear a job or a hobby, avocation or vocation?
Well, I think it fulfills that, you know, curiosity that I have. It's a philosophy. It's kind of a way of being in the world, and you know it in some cases it pays the bills, and then there's all the work at Craft Alliance that that's a full-time 9-to-5 sort of thing. So I'm in a situation where I teach and I make and I build programs and facilitate programs. So yeah, it's very much a way of life and a job.
In about the 60 seconds we've got left, a final word for the students about just the value of art as you see it, or pursuing the passion for art that they have as art students?
Well, I say, never really do anything that you're not proud enough to show somebody else, and make that good, and have humility in what you're learning and in your talents, and hopefully you'll have grace in your success, and find these places, get curious, try these things, and I think the stuff that you guys are doing here in the Inside the Artist Studios and your programming in large really kind of puts a lot in front of these students. So it's a rather keen thing. So y'all just come go get them and be smart and head down and conjure up and learn stuff. And you know, the biggest thing is to fulfill your potential, right? So go get them.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks very much. I want to thank our interactive student groups for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to connect with Cornersville, Tennessee, and Kelton High School in Wheeler, Texas, and of course our good friends up at McBride in British Columbia. This program, as I mentioned before, will be archived on the website along with our morning program, which was with woodworking artist Matt Kime. It'll be on HEC-TV.org. A week from now, we'll actually be at COCA, the Center for Contemporary Art in St. Louis, for our next program, which will be about their program, The Little Dancer. So we'll explore the world of dance next Tuesday. Robert, thanks again. It's always a pleasure to work with you and Craft Alliance.
I look forward to your pirouettes next week.
Oh, cool. Bye, everybody. It's good to be with you as part of HEC-TV Live.